Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, our 33rd Zoom panel discussion. We are especially grateful that you are joining us live during this very busy time of year, especially as there are so many compelling events vying for your attention. This evening, we are excited to welcome and privileged to hear multiple perspectives on the topic of Japanese women ceramic artists, who are the subject of the upcoming exhibition opening this Saturday at the Art Institute of Chicago titled Radical Clay, Contemporary Women Artists from Japan. Through the technology of Zoom, we will hear from key figures located around the globe who were involved with this special traveling exhibition and very handsome and informative accompanying publication. The creation of our panel and its timing was motivated by the Chicago exhibition. The artworks in the show are all drawn from the Carol and Jeffrey Horvitz collection, and we will be hearing from Carol Horvitz tonight, speaking at this moment from Chicago on her critical role in envisioning this exhibition and then bringing it to fruition. Curator Hollis Goodall, the former longtime and well-respected curator of Japanese art at the LA County Museum in sunny California, contributed to the exhibition catalog and will offer her perspective that is informed by decades-long experience at arts institutions. Artists Tomita Mikiko and TASHIMA ETSUKO, both gallery artists from the Osaka area, whose works are included in Radical Clay, represent different points of view and provide their insights as both creative talents and as teachers. Our interpreter tonight will be Daniel Borngasser, who I met in Japan last year when he was an associate fellow at the Kyoto National Museum and is currently a PhD candidate in Japanese art history at Harvard. So with the miracle of Zoom, our participants are actually located in 4 different time zones on 2 different dates in 5 different cities in 2 countries. It's amazing. Indeed, our large global audience hails from over a dozen countries, some new for us, like Costa Rica and the Cayman Islands. And we have registered viewers from over 30 states, including distant Hawaii and Alaska. Thank you to those just awakening very early in the morning in Asia and to those postponing their bedtimes in Europe. Including in this diverse audience are a remarkably broad range of museum professionals, including a significant number of curators and directors from domestic and international museums. Hopefully, tonight's discussion will inspire some future programming. Welcome to everyone who has gathered from near and far who will bring their unique interest to this event. Should you have comments and questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and time allowing, we will address those questions following the main discussion that we expect to last just over an hour. The topic of Japanese women ceramic artists has been addressed in our previous Zoom talks, but an exhibition at such a major United States museum, such as the Art Institute of Chicago, will surely bring this subject to the attention of a much broader audience. This is a milestone achievement, not only for these 36 women artists in the show, spanning 3 generations, but also for the entire field of contemporary clay in Japan, showcasing the pinnacle in innovation and their artistry over the past few decades. While there might appear to be a profusion of women artist-focused shows recently at US institutions and galleries, the particular position of Japanese women in the arts merits special consideration. Historically, Japanese women were artistically stifled by restrictive views on their societal roles and the lack of freedom in regards to their career choices, especially in the area of ceramics. Their involvement in earlier times, if any, was mostly unseen and anonymous, perhaps delegated to managing the studio for her father or husband. Benefiting from the advent of university art degree programs in the post-war era, women have since emerged from this long history of obscurity as full-fledged artists in their own right. The past half-century in Japan has therefore witnessed an incredible burst of creativity from women clay artists who are largely unburdened by centuries of very specific ceramic traditions. The first exhibition I must mention is Soaring Voices, Recent Ceramics by Women from Japan, that opened at the Shigaraki Ceramic Culture Park in 2007. A show of 25 Japanese women clay artists organized by the intrepid curators Nishimaya and Miura Hiroko traveled to Paris before making an extensive tour of US museums for several years through 2012. And actually, personally, I saw 7 of those venues, including 2 in Japan, Paris, and from Washington all the way to Sacramento. And each time I saw the show, I learned more, saw more, and it was startling to see the same material displayed in different venues. Soaring Voices served as a catalyst for opening doors to these tremendously talented and arguably underappreciated artists. The subsequent international recognition and acceptance, in turn, awakened the Japanese domestic arbiters of taste, who had previously chosen to overlook these groundbreaking women. Nearly simultaneous to that well-traveled show was Touch Fire, Contemporary Japanese Ceramics by Women exhibition at Smith College Museum of Art in 2009, curated in part by Professor Todate Kazuko, whose insights in the beautifully illustrated and informative catalog have proved indispensable to collectors and those in the field. I returned to see that show twice and hear presentations by 2 of the featured artists. That relatively small show of 21 women had an outsized impact in the intervening decade plus, and many of the artists in Touch Fire are still working and seeing their work exhibited again, and more recent work in the United States venue of Radical Clay. And paired with them are new younger artists represented alongside. More recently, the smaller but choice Born of Fire exhibition at the Crow Museum in Dallas features the work of Japanese women clay artists, again from the collection of Carol and Jeffrey Horvitz. Like many of the shows organized by the formidable and tireless Carol Horvitz, it has been on the road since its Texas debut and has traveled to the museums at Washington and Lee University and the Dayton Art Institute in Ohio. But it is not only in the US that museums are paying attention. Last year, the Musée Guimet in Paris organized Toucher le Feu, Femmes Céramiques au Japon, showcasing their growing collection of works by Japanese women ceramic artists. For me, watching a predominantly French audience encounter these artists' works for the first time was a remarkably gratifying experience. And to me, it affirmed the universally captivating qualities of this material that transcends language and cultural boundaries. So in light of these milestone exhibitions, this field in Japan is poised to accelerate in terms of both innovation and growth. Increased international attention has elevated the profile of these featured women artists and invite in a new generation of ceramists to offer their own bold new ideas. What began as an underdog narrative has now, in a relatively short span of time, become a story of celebration and deserved success. Indeed, with access to university degree programs developed in the post-war era, women dominate today's ceramic programs. Now, at last, these institutions have female faculty members, such as Todate Sensei at Tama University in Tokyo, Hayashi Kaku, formerly at Bunsei University, and Tashima Etsuko at Osaka University of the Arts, from whom we will hear shortly. Furthermore, women are winning prestigious national awards, receiving major commissions, having noteworthy solo shows in art galleries and all-important department store venues, and even solo retrospectives at prominent museums. Operating outside of longstanding tradition, women artists are at the vanguard of development, and the depth and range of contemporary Japanese ceramic art has never been richer as a result. So let me turn to my first question, which will go to Carol, which without her, we would not be here. So what I'm going to do is first introduce each of the speakers before posing my first question. So prior to becoming one of the busiest, and may I say unpaid curators in America, Carol, a native of Cincinnati, graduated from Tufts University and received her JD and MPH from Boston University. Early on, she had a career establishing hospital cancer programs. Decades later, her passion for Asian art led her in 2008 to assemble a vast survey collection of Japanese contemporary ceramics, and over time became the largest outside of Japan. She has used this vast collection as a resource in ongoing programs of gifts and loans, supported publications, and has thus far had 5 exhibitions, of which has involved some 30 museums across the United States. At this moment, 20 American museums have works from the Horvitz Collection on long-term loan. In addition to radical clay, 56 works from the Horvitz Collection by the family of porcelain artists named Kondo are currently on display at the Brooklyn Museum in an exhibition that opened last week that was first presented at the Low Art Museum in Miami. Following Brooklyn, that exhibition is booked at 4 subsequent venues, hopefully at a museum near you, like the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Crow Museum of Asian Art in Dallas, the Crocker Museum in Sacramento, and the Ackland Museum at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And knowing Carol, there will be other venues that will follow suit thereafter. Carol shares a broad interest in art with her husband, Jeffrey, who is a well-known collector in other areas. Together, they reside on the North Shore of Boston. So Carol, in our previous Zoom conversations together, we discussed the incredible exhibition of work of Japanese women artists at the Crow Museum in Dallas, Born of Fire, which was also drawn from your collection, as I have said. That show featured over a dozen important artists and has been on the road to U.S. museums ever since. This new show on the same subject, Radical Clay, features work by nearly 3 times as many artists and will also head to other museum venues across the country. Can you tell us how these 2 exhibitions expand upon and are different from the earlier shows that I mentioned, Soaring Voices and Touch Fire? And what did you wish to achieve with this latest exhibition? Carol.
Hello, everyone. And Joan, thank you for organizing and hosting this webinar, one of the many from the great series that you have been offering to the worldwide public. And thank you for the introduction, certainly flattering. Thank you. I would like to take a moment to say thank you to everyone at the Art Institute of Chicago for making this most recent exhibition, Radical Clay, Contemporary Women Artists from Japan, possible, starting at the top with James Rondeau, President and Director, and of course, Janice Katz, Curator of Japanese Art, who was tasked with making my idea come true. And to all the others on Team Chicago, too many to be named individually, who fast-tracked this show, publishing the catalog and securing additional venues, all in just a few short months. Also, my thanks to Hollis Goodall, Curator of Japanese Art at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art for over 43 years, only recently retired. And to Joe Earl, esteemed scholar and expert of all things Asian, who has once again raised the bar for contemporary Japanese ceramic art exhibitions and publications. In answer to your question, Joan, Soaring Voices, Touch Fire, and Born of Fire were 3 important exhibitions, each a huge success, sparking tremendous interest. What distinguishes Radical Clay is that, as you mentioned in your question, substantially more artists that are represented in this show. The works are top quality, and there's an increased focus on the younger generation of leading artists. Even at the relatively large size of the current exhibition, it is impossible to present all the artists who are deserving of wider recognition. While giving prominent exposure to the younger generation, we have sought to be respectful in a sort of homage to the pioneers. Radical Clay walks through the door opened by the prior exhibition and attempts to better represent what is now a strong sentiment among museums, to showcase the accomplishment of women in the visual arts more than simply as a sort of remediation for underappreciated or overlooked women artists. Finally, we do and hope and expect that this show will allow the largest viewing audience possible, welcoming many into the orbit of excitement and wonder that we experienced upon first seeing this art form. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. I should mention that Carol and Jeffrey have traveled with me to Japan on a number of occasions, and we've also been together at some of the venues that they have underwritten and supported. And here's a wonderful picture from over a dozen years ago with the artist Mishima Kimiyo, who Hollis will be hopefully answering my question about. And it's been a treat and a pleasure for me to be with you two and watch that wonderment and that excitement as you encounter the work of each new artist. So thank you, Carol. My next question is for Hollis. Hollis is, as you just heard, the recently retired curator of Japanese art at LACMA, where she worked for 43 years and created a breathtaking, unbelievable 276 exhibitions and installations. In 2023, she co-curated San Francis and Japan, Emptiness Overflowing at LACMA. Hollis continues to work on multiple writing and exhibition projects. Publications include Living for the Moment, Japanese prints from the Barbara S. Bowman collection, which I had the honor and privilege of collaborating with her on this project, which was supported by my beloved client, Barbara, and released in conjunction with the exhibition in 2015. Hollis also authored an online publication, Japan Crazed, Cross-Cultural Expression in the Work of Sam Francis and Other Post-War Artists at LACMA, with Leslie Jones and Richard Spear in 2022. Her essay, A Brittle Bounty, Ceramic Works by Mishima Kimiyo, was published in the exhibition catalog for Radical Clay, by the way, now available for purchase online. So my first question to you, Hollis, is one of the most senior artists represented in the show is Mishima Kimiyo, who, as you say in the catalog, quote, stands outside the group of women presented in this volume. From your curatorial perspective, could you tell us what about Mishima's work was and remains so truly groundbreaking? And how does her work and her biography as an artist defy categorization, as you state?
Well, I'd like to start that answer by looking back at Mishima's early successful work. I'd seen and appreciated Mishima's ceramic work in various galleries, but for the first time in 2018 at Nonaka Hill Gallery in Los Angeles, there was an exhibition of her collaged canvases from the mid-1960s. The piece on the left is one of the works that I saw at that time. And the collage on the right is included in my essay for Radical Clay. These works gave me a much different viewpoint about Mishima because of her apparently native ability to create a beautiful composition. Her capacity is dual. She expertly balances space and mass and structures that around a diary of bits of information that strike her as interesting. She continues to work on what catches her eye graphically, as well as pushing forward her concept of trash and its overwhelming nature. The original concept of trash for Mishima, according to what I have read and heard, came from the overflow of garbage in the society of the 1970s, continuing today, though reduced by recycling and reuse. Not only did trash compound daily, but objects that were apparently useful in the moment, like newspapers, cardboard boxes, or drink cans, landed at one's door, were immediately consumed, and just as quickly lost their value, making their way into the solid waste stream. The Horvitz Collection Asahi Beer Box from 2007 is part of the continuum of work that occurred after Mishima's transition to silk screening on clay around 1971. As she recounts her story, Mishima was sitting in her studio in Osaka, saw a wadded piece of paper trash on the floor, and began thinking about what it would be like to reproduce such an object in an extremely fragile material. Her concept was to convey through art the anxiety that the constant stream of trash created in her, and she found an equivalent to that in that tension in highly breakable ceramics. Though her husband had taught her the fundamentals of painting, she was self-taught in her approach to ceramics. She had done silk screening already in her practice, so the trick was to learn to create thin enough sheets of clay that she could both silk screen each side and manipulate the clay into trash-like shapes. It was a roller for making udon that produced the thin sheets of clay that she required for her art. The Horvitz Asahi Beer Box shows how sophisticated she became over the years in reproducing and composing her trompe-l'oeil trash. What Mishima wants people to take away from her art is the diary aspect. That each day we confront consumable materials and transform it into trash. And the trash itself tells the story of the passage of time. The trash represented records the tastes, graphic arts, or news stories of the moment. Looking at the next slide, we see that in the 2000s, Mishima has worked in a great variety of scales and is now incorporating various types of disposed materials into her work. This installation piece at the Mori Museum is one that shows her working in a magnified scale with various materials. The installation piece at the Mori is not the largest of her works. Her largest is at the art factory Jonanjima in Tokyo, and records newspaper reports dating between 1900 and 2000, with 10,000 used fire bricks, kiln fire bricks, as substrates upon which she silk screened articles in multiple languages on the two broad faces of each brick. She's recently worked with incinerated sludge from garbage facilities and volcanic ash to further expand her concept about recombined trash from a variety of eras. The best way to look at the Jonanjima work is by looking at a YouTube video, and I think Bonnie's going to provide you with the address for that in the Q&A section or chat. The final slide exemplifies the ability of Mishima to work on various scales and in the live environment. Looking at this pair of work, I would say in conclusion that Mishima lies outside of the continuum of ceramists in Japan because she is a conceptualist and a diarist, delivering a message to her viewers rather than sculpting beautiful and dynamic forms. Her interest in technique is purely functional, trying for whatever gets the job done. Her work remains compelling because she's correct in her assumption that a wry approach to her subject will enthrall art viewers and collectors alike. Back to you, John.
I hope our viewers have some sense of scale, that the trash pail that you're looking at is, 197 inches. It's taller than a human being. And each of those elements inside the pail is a separate element that has been assembled and organized by her over time. I wanted to ask you a question, Hollis, about the word and her fixation or interest in text, whether it be from a New York Times newspaper or a French newspaper or Australian. I've seen all kinds of things. And what do you think that emanates from, or why is that so compelling to her as an artist?
Well, she has explained that in various interviews. One thing I wanted to point out before I answer that question is like looking at these two trash pails.
Mhm.
The one that was done in 2005 has large paper objects that have been crumpled up, And then the one from 2021 has cans. And her recent interest has been, and she was sitting outside of her studio and saw some vending machines across the street and saw people, you know, like buying a can, drinking it, and chucking it instantly. So not even, you know, a minute goes by until the commercial product turns into trash. So that shows in this evolution of the trash can theme. She mentioned that she was attracted visually to Western languages. Her husband used to read American and French newspapers in particular. And she also lived with him briefly in New York. And I know that she went to Paris a lot. She met up with Tsugai Kumi there. She would go around collecting trash and bring home suitcases full of trash. So that's part of it. Part of it, she also said that she would cut out stuff that interested her, and she was really interested in celebrities, etc. And I pointed out in the catalog, the smaller piece from the Horvitz Collection talks about nuclear proliferation. It was a time when Reagan was in office. You know, I was talking about that moment in time when, you know, a certain politics had hold in America and allowed for nuclear proliferation. And so, you know, her choices of all of those news stories from 1900 to 2000 were based on sort of the language, the culture, the priorities of people in all of those years.
Yeah. Thank you, Hollis. That's great. Terrific. My next question then, I would like to address to Tashima Etsuko sensei, who is a graduate of Osaka University of the Arts and studied under Yanagihara Mutsuo. Tashima is now a tenured professor of ceramics there and one of the first women to achieve this distinction at a major university in Japan. She has been exhibiting as an artist regularly since the mid-1980s. Her work, inspired by her own body parts, was more controversial perhaps than her current work, which looks to nature for inspiration. For the past decade, she has refined her large biomorphic sculptures by combining the bodies with pastel-colored cast glass elements. She creates elegant and dazzling flower-like sculptures that are often exhibited in large groupings and room-sized installations. A winner of the prestigious Japan Ceramic Society Award, her work is collected by numerous major museums around the world and is, of course, currently on view in Radical Clay. So Tashima Sensei, my question to you and to Daniel, who will be interpreting for her. In one of our previous Zoom gallery talks, Professor Todate spoke about the groundbreaking work you created in the 1980s, which at the time scandalously used your own body as a model for your work. Can you tell us more about this group of artists known as Supergirls? And how did those early experiences with experimentation in that era influence the glass and ceramic botanical sculptures that characterize your current body of work? Daniel and Todate Sensei, please.
こんにちは、田島悦子です。この度のズームイベントでお話しできます機会と、そして私の作品がシカゴ美術館の展覧会で展示いただけますことに心から感謝しております。現在私は大阪芸術大学工芸学科陶芸コースで教鞭をとっております。本学の特色は伝統に縛られない自由な雰囲気があり、私はこの大学で陶芸を学びました。
Hello, everyone. I am Tashima Etsuko. I am sincerely grateful for the opportunity to participate in this Zoom event, and also for the chance to have my work exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago. I currently teach ceramics in the crafts department at Osaka University of the Arts. Our university is unique in that it encourages an atmosphere of freedom that is unbound by tradition. I am also a graduate of this university, where I studied ceramics as a student.
恩師は日本陶芸の開拓者である林康夫、柳原睦夫、山田光先生ですが、特に柳原睦夫先生からご教示いただきました。
Among my teachers were such pioneers in Japanese ceramics as Hayashi Yasuo, Yanagihara Mutsuo, and Yamada Hikaru.
柳原先生はアメリカの大学でもご指導されていたので、当時のアメリカ陶芸の様子を伺うことは表現に多大な可能性を感じました。
But Yanagihara sensei in particular is someone from whom I learned a lot. Yanagihara sensei also taught at universities in the United States. So being able to hear from him about the state of ceramics in America at the time allowed me to greatly expand my own understanding of my potential for creative expression.
まずはじめにご紹介いたします作品は、1981年、私の卒業制作です。私は女性とは何か、自分とは何かを真面目に考え、決して不真面目に人を驚かせるのではなく、作品を作ることで探ろうとしていました。
So to begin, I would like to introduce my graduation project from 1981. I had been seriously contemplating questions such as, what does it mean to be a woman? And so what am I? I wanted to explore these questions seriously through creating artworks, but I did not want to just shock people by being flippant in my approach.
私は卒業制作のために、私自身の両脚を石膏で直取りした型を作り、その型で粘土成形を行いました。
So to make this piece, I created plaster casts of my legs, and then I used those casts as molds for forming the clay.
卒業後もこのような作品制作を行っていましたが、粘土が乾燥、焼成のプロセスで実物よりサイズが小さくなることに現実感が薄らぎ、人体の肌に直接触れた石膏型の内側に生々しいエロティシズムを感じさせられ、人体型による陶芸作品は作らなくなりました。
So even after graduating, I continued creating works like this, but I eventually realized that through the drying of the clay and of course in the firing process, the size of the artwork becomes much smaller. The works evoked a sensuous eroticism in the way they transmitted the surface of my skin, but the decrease in size also diminished their sense of realism. So in the end, I decided to stop creating artworks made from molds of my body.
しかしながら、後ほどご紹介します陶とガラスによる作品へ大いにつながっています。
However, this early work connects in important ways with my later works that use glass and ceramics together, which I will talk about in a little bit.
次に制作したのは人体を思いっきり抽象化しました。作品タイトル、ええやんか、こんなんあったって、大阪弁ですが、良い意味での開き直りの言葉です。
So next, I created works in which I decided to completely abstract the form of the human body. The title of this piece, Eiyanka Konnanatate, is a phrase in the dialect of Osaka meaning something like, well, whatever, this is just how it is. It signifies resignation, but it's said with a sense of positive defiance.
思うがままに陶芸で自分の表現をしてみたく、高さ2メートル20センチほどのトーテンポール作品を個展会場いっぱいに展示しました。
I wanted to express myself unabashedly through ceramics, so I created these totemic poles, measuring 2.2 meters or over 7 feet in height, that filled the exhibition space.
陶芸家になるためには、公募展で入選し、受賞することが登竜門とされていました。私もチャレンジしたのですが、ご覧の通り他の作品とは全く違いました。見事落選です。
So now at the time, it was generally accepted that in order to become a professional ceramics artist, you had to enter and win prizes in open call exhibitions. I also attempted to do this, but as you can see, my work was completely different from what others were making, and I failed spectacularly.
当に評価されることに愚問を感じ、古典中心に作品発表を行いました。
But I felt that it was foolish for my work to be evaluated by others in this way, so I focused instead on exhibiting in solo gallery exhibitions.
当時、陶芸で作品を作るからには、陶芸らしくあらねばならないなど意識になく、自分のイメージを具現化することのできる身近な素材でした。
I didn't have any sense that I needed to conform to traditional ideas of ceramics, even if what I was making was ceramic artwork. For me, it was a medium through which I could manifest my own imagination.
1980年代半ば、日本の現代美術はインスタレーションが大流行しており、同時に絵画、彫刻、工芸のさまざまな分野で女性作家が色彩豊かに外へ広がる開放的な表現が多く見られ、日本を代表する美術専門誌、美術手帳が美術の超少女たちの特集を組んでいました。
In the 1980s, installations were not uncommon in contemporary Japanese art. You could see many examples of works by female artists in painting, sculpture, craft, or other media, and who were liberated to create expansive works in rich and vibrant colors. It was around this time that the popular Japanese art journal Bijutsu Techo published a special issue titled Bijutsu no Choushoujo Tachi, or The Supergirls of Art.
現在の女性作家の表現は密度を感じますが、内へ向かうような作品が多く見受けられる気がいたします。
Artworks by female artists at that time felt very different from what I'm seeing female artists make today. The work I see today feels denser and seems to be turning inward.
人体なのか、植物なのか、女性のパワーを空間いっぱいに表現してみたと思いました。
Is it a human body or a plant? Through my own installations, I wanted to express the power of women by feeling the entire space.
巨大サイズにこだわらず、じっくり鑑賞できる作品も作り始めました。
So instead of focusing on pieces that are very large in size, I've also started creating works that can be observed and appreciated more slowly and intimately.
さらに作品は変化し、シンプルな形態へ進み、釉薬はほどかさなくなりました。シンプルにすることでイメージが豊かに膨らみ、居心地の良さを感じました。
My artworks continued to evolve by moving towards simpler forms and eventually by eliminating the use of glaze altogether. This way of simplifying actually enhanced the richness of the imagery.
陶器の内部は伽藍銅です。伽藍銅の表面にさまざまな釉薬を焼き付けることは、まるで女性が厚化粧をしているようで、すべてを取り除きたと思いました。
The inside of a vessel is completely empty. Applying all kinds of glazes on the surface felt to me like a woman putting on heavy makeup. I wanted to remove it all.
表面を覆っていたものを取り除けば、地肌が見え、釉薬をなくすことで形態が露出します。形態への追求が始まりました。
Just as removing makeup reveals the natural skin underneath, eliminating the glaze exposed the form. So this marked the beginning of my pursuit of form.
ダンスに興味があり、電気窯でモールドキャストの試作を行っていました。特に耐火石膏の内側である片肌には、原型表面の細やかな表情が映し取られ、人肌のような温かなマットの質感は、塊でありながらも光を透過し、小さな泡粒に生命の息吹を感じました。
I was interested in glass, so I experimented with mold casting in an electric kiln. On the inner surface of the plaster molds, I was able to capture a delicate quality like the warm, matte texture of human skin. Despite being solid, they transmitted light, and I felt a sense of life in the tiny bubbles of air visible in the glass.
当時制作していた白い塔に近づけると、ピタッとくる直感があり、ガラスとの組み合わせ作品が始まりました。
When I juxtaposed my glass work with my white ceramic, I felt that they would just fit together perfectly. This successful pairing led me to begin creating artworks that combined ceramics with glass.
この石膏型の内側、痕跡を残すリアルな型肌への興味は、卒業制作の人体を石膏で直撮りすることよりもたらされたと言えます。
My interest in the realistic surfaces created from the interior of plaster molds could have originated from my earlier experiments in directly casting from my body for my graduation project.
Thank you so much, Sensei. That was really informative and sort of fascinating to see from the middle 80s to where you are today and where you are going in the future. And I loved your analogy of the surface of the white clay feeling like human skin, which of course was a goal of Tomimoto Kenkichi, who spoke about that as well in the form of a vessel, but in the form of a botanical sculpture, it may be even more evocative. Thank you. I'd like now to turn to our other guest from Japan tonight, who is Tomita Mikiko. She was born in Osaka, but spent her childhood in Portugal, where she was drawn to the surrounding art and elaborate architectural ornamentation. Her study of Islamic mosques, stupas, and Burmese pagodas made another lifelong impact on her aesthetic vision. Tomita studied ceramics at Kyoto City University of the Art, where upon graduation, she was awarded the Tomimoto Kenkichi Prize, their prestigious alumni encouragement award. For her colorful Iro-e porcelain sculptural works, she uses a technique inspired by morie, a method of overglaze painting traditional to Mie prefecture wares. Her works are extremely evocative, suggestive of biomorphic creatures or even the process of cell division. Relatively early in her career, Tomita's sculptures were featured in the landmark 2009 Touch Fire exhibition at Smith. And needless to say, she is now represented in radical clay by an extremely intricate and masterful work. And my first question to her is, as a standout in the current generation of clay artists, can you please tell us about your unusual personal background and how it inspires and informs your quite exceptional work? And please, I would love to hear you speak about some of the spiritual aspects of your oeuvre, so very unusual among Japanese clay artists.
I was 12 years old. I was living in Lisbon, Portugal, added to my father's work. When he had time off, my father sometimes took us to various regional cities and towns around Portugal. We visited many ancient ruins and historic sites. I was always very moved by the kind of architecture, decoration, and treasures that I saw on these trips. Also, my house is old, and I have a lot of instruction with temples. So I often go to Komyoji, the temple that I was indebted to, and I used to look at the decorations inside the temples. When I examined the miniature, intricate decorates of the decoration that filled this immense vertical space, I felt an overwhelming sense of awe at its grandeur, as if I had a glimpse of the vast scale of the universe. I tried to create artwork that evoked the same feeling of wonder in others. As for the spiritual aspects of my work, I believe that there is a reason why people feel a similar sense of awe and beauty in the space of religious art culture as they do when confronted with the vast scale of nature of the cosmos. This is because people naturally feel reverence towards nature. Stars and atoms alike are formed by the same laws of the universe. Molecules are composed of those atoms, and organisms and plants are composed of those molecules. Therefore, I feel there is a similar beauty between leisure space, the cosmos, and nature. Nature has power beyond human contemplation, and so we humans decorate religious and ceremonial space to honor and worship that power. Since people are also a part of nature, we are done things to make visible the laws of the universe that we feel within our DNA. I am also a part of the universe, and I believe that I am moved by these natural laws inscribed within my cells, atoms, and their particles within me. I create patterns and forms that spring from my heart and soul. I thoroughly immerse myself in creating work, just as applies a prayer in a religious ritual.
Thank you, Tomita-san. I'm always impressed to hear the power of your inspiration and your direction from where you come up with these amazingly creative forms and patterns. And our audience who can't see these really well probably has no idea of the intricacy of the painting and the number of glazes that are used to create these miraculous surfaces. They need to be seen in person. So get yourself to Chicago or see the show in person somewhere else, but astonishing. Thank you so much, Tomita. I would now like to return to Carol and ask her another question. So Carol, now that we have been fortunate to see the work of now 3 leading women artists in the show, Radical Clay, however, includes an incredibly wide range of styles, forms from yet another 33 senior and junior women artists from Japan. Surely there had to have been a selection process from your vast collection of not only which artists, but which artworks were to be selected. Maybe you could shed a little light for us on how you worked together with the curators at the Art Institute Chicago, how you chose the works, and why you chose those works. What were the many important considerations you had to consider for such an ambitious traveling exhibition with venues at a wide variety of institutions and with variations in logistical support and exhibition space?
There are many factors that go into the selection for an exhibition. In the picture here, Joe, Janice, and I are assembled at the Crozier Warehouse in Delaware in mid-September 2022, with Jeffrey on Zoom, deciding which pieces would make the final cut for the show. Among the 4 of us that very busy day at the warehouse, there was no one final decider, and no decisions were made that day without careful consideration of the prior input from all who were involved, including, of course, Joan and other dealers, as well as the artists themselves. Our choices of what to include, what not, were often a matter of debate. Sometimes we strongly disagreed, but we always were respectful and mindful of our common goal to provide the public with a first-class experience and hopefully the best to date. As to the factors that guided us in our decision-making process, perhaps the first and most important consideration, as it is for all multi-venue exhibitions, is shipping feasibility and vulnerability. Some of the pieces we most wanted in the show were simply impossible to safely pack and ship. Another factor we considered was didactic. We picked some pieces to compare and contrast, but more than just as a juxtaposition of similar and opposite, as I hope you can see in the photo here of Savoy Asuka's ancient skirt and Tanaka used knotted wrapping cloth. Two artists from different generations using clay to depict fabric. Also, placement of an object was a huge factor in our consideration. We wanted to be able to allow the viewer to consider the relationship between two or more pieces without further instruction. Exhibitions should also have energy. So some pieces were chosen over others as having a naturally powerful visual impact, as I hope you can see here in the picture of Tomita Mikiko's amazing sculpture with a golden top. Some were chosen because they have a backstory or a back history that is instructive as to the emergence of women in the field, giving the viewer a historical perspective as described in the catalog. Some were chosen because, at least at first glance, they appear to take a sharp detour from the more expected Japanese styles. Some interesting pieces were not included because they were simply too big or too small. Some were chosen knowing that they must be placed in a protective case. Therefore, these pieces needed to be strong enough visually so as not to fade away behind the plex or glass. And sometimes there were individual preferences, in which case we usually defer to the curators. After all, it is their show.
Thank you, Carol. I'm glad we're ending on this beautiful, magnificent masterwork by Tomita-san. It's really quite extraordinary. And I have some sense of what it is to pack and repack and then pack again and pack again. And in this case, you're dealing with different staff at different venues who maybe have little or no experience with this particular type of artwork. So it's good to know for the integrity of those works of art that you have generously loaned, that they've been chosen with their endurance factor taken into account. That's really important. Thank you, Carol. My next question goes back to Tomita-san. In a previous Zoom talk, professor and gallery artist Hayashi Kaku discussed how many of the younger artists, including her students, have shied away from using color in their ceramic work. By contrast, your work is bursting with an array of colors accentuated by gold. Can you tell us more about your process for using such a wide variety of glazes to create such incredibly harmonious surfaces? And why, in your opinion, do you think many of your fellow women artists, particularly younger women, do not use color at all in their work?
I use a lot of overglaze animals that are traditionally found in Japanese ceramics. Japanese overglaze enamels contain a high amount of glass, so they tend to peel off if they don't bond well with the clay or glaze. So I conduct a lot of tests to find the right pairings of clay and glaze that have a strong affinity, and I select the glaze that will not flake off. To create high-browned colors, I mix enamels myself using several types of pigments so that I can achieve a more colorful result. But there are challenges to this process. The color of unfired enamels changes once they are fired. This means that when I am painting, I have to select the colors of the enamels while also imagining that the final fired colors will look like. I can do this by referencing my test pieces. To realize such colorful work, selecting the pigments requires visualizing various patterns and anticipating their outcomes. So it takes a lot of time. Finally, gold color is applied and fired. This work is finished by assembling the completed parts. You also asked me about why other artists don't use much colors in their works. Personally, I've had many opportunities to see very colorful and high-bright works on display, so I had not really noticed that to be the case. But if it is as you say, I can offer a couple of thoughts on way that may be. First, in Japan today, IKEA is very popular. So there seems to be a trend of people preferring simpler things in plain colors. This trend may be having a particular influence on the young age generation. Then, overglaze painting requires skills working in materials that are very different from clay. If a school or university does not have any teachers who are able to teach these skills, students naturally may not have the opportunities to create artwork using color. Third, there are many talented artists who create truly wonderful artworks without using any color at all. So it may be that a lot of young artists have taken such talented artists as role models for their own work.
Thank you very much, Tomita-san. It's sort of interesting to think that a paucity of resources may be somewhat influential in the use of predominantly white ceramic work among women. It's interesting. And the other one is, well, it's a lot easier too. And when we saw these amazing details that you showed of your work and the layers of glazing and the underglazing and the overglazing, which is yet to be overglazed and overglazed yet again, in that respect, it's very easy to understand why others leave it to you and prefer the color white. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll go to Tashima. As the first woman to be appointed as a full professor in ceramics at a major university department in Japan, can you tell us about your personal journey and the challenges you faced in order to succeed in this prestigious position? Secondly, as Osaka's ceramic program is known for valuing bold originality and for producing many artists focused on sculpture, do you think your experiences and background made you well suited for Osaka University compared to those in Kyoto or even Tokyo?
私が大阪芸術大学卒業後も途切れない創作への探求心と作家として実績を上げることで柳原睦夫先生から教鞭を取ることを母校へご推薦くださいました。芸術を志す学生の熱い眼差しは私自身の創作に新鮮な思いを呼び覚ましてくれます。
So after I graduated from Osaka University of the Arts, I remained devoted to my creative pursuits, and I became increasingly successful as an artist. Because of this, I was nominated to succeed my teacher, Professor Yanagihara, as the ceramics teacher at my alma mater. Being able to teach students who express true passion for the arts continues to inspire new ideas and creativity that I bring to my artistic endeavors.
教授が女性であることについて特に問題を感じたことはございません。最近、大学で陶芸を学ぶ学生数の男女比は、女子学生の増加が目立っております。
As for being a female professor, it's never really been much of an issue for me. In fact, recently, the gender ratio of students studying ceramics at Japanese universities has shown a noticeable increase in the number of female students.
大阪が他の土地と比較して、オリジナリティや大胆さを重視する傾向があるのは、その土地特有の歴史や環境が影響している可能性があります。
The fact that Osaka tends to value originality and bold expression more than other cities in Japan might have something to do with the influence of its unique local history and environment.
私が大阪で生まれ育ち、大阪が創作の本拠地となることは、作風の変遷のエネルギーになっています。さながら、1980年代の関西のアートシーンが、私の作品に影響を与えていることは間違いありません。
Having been born and raised in Osaka, the city has become the bedrock of my creativity, providing energy for the development of my artistic style. So there's no doubt that the Kansai art scene of the 1980s has profoundly impacted my work.
オリジナリティとパワーの共存する雰囲気が、創作者である私自身と作品に存在していると思います。
So I feel that there is something like a blend of originality and power within myself as an artist that also resonates throughout my works.
Thank you, Tashima, and thank you, Dan, for giving us some insight. And of course, I'm very hopeful for the future with this influx of women in clay within the academic structure, that the future is very bright for women clay artists of the next generation to come around. Thank you, Sensei. Carol, you're next. It's your final question. But as a both collector and a museum patron, how do you actually plan for your future collection building? And based on your countless numbers of experience working with curators from academic museums to major civic museums, is there a balance you have between supporting and advocating for the artist who you strongly believe in, yet fitting those particular works and that artist's overall oeuvre within a museum collection? How do you balance all that out?
Thank you, Jen, for the question. It is, of course, complicated. And as a lawyer, I can say it depends. Just had to say that. So when we first started to seriously collect in January of 2008, we had lunch with you, Joan, and the three of us sat down to develop a basic collecting policy. That policy was that we would collect ceramics that were clearly Japanese, museum quality, and museum displayable. At the beginning, we did not spend much time considering existing collections at the museums. Rather, we left it up to the museums as to what would be a good fit and where, either in their Asian art area, their contemporary gallery, or both. More recently, we have attempted to be more actively engaged with museums, discussing their collections, their direction, their desires. But with the number of museums active in our lending program, you can imagine the degree of complexity. Fast forward 15 years, we have purchased over 1,500 pieces, gifted over 300 to 20 museums, with another 300 promised or to be promised in the next few years. And at any one time, approximately two-thirds of our collection is on loan, being held for a loan, or is in an exhibition or exhibitions, traveling museum to museum. We do truly believe that art only becomes art when it is seen. As to advocating for a specific artist or artists, there have been several. For example, Fujikasa Satoko, for whom from the moment we first saw her work at the Hagi Museum in 2002 or 2011, pictured here, we just knew she was a great talent. We purchased 7 pieces from that exhibition, and since then we purchased 5 more. We have given away 7 of her works, with another in radical clay and 2 more that are TBDs as to their final destination. As to the future, both far and near, we do plan to continue our purchasing, lending, and gifting program. And I assure you there are a couple of other exhibitions in the works. I will look forward to telling you about them when they are further along. In general, however, I can tell you that whenever an idea for an exhibition comes up, it has been our habit to first reach out to the museums to gauge their interest. Once interest is established, we then invite the museum or museums to interpret the show as they desire, and we greatly enjoy seeing how each institution chooses to display the object. In closing, I hope you enjoy seeing Radical Clay that is opening this Saturday here in Chicago. If you miss it in Chicago, you can see it at its subsequent locations, including 2 that are officially booked, the Ringling Museum in Sarasota and the Ackland Museum at Chapel Hill, or at one of the several other venues now under consideration, soon to be announced. I thank you all. I look forward to seeing many of you soon, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Carol. As I said, one should see these shows at more than one venue. One is not enough, and you will see the works in a different light depending on which context they are shown as interpreted by the curators in that particular institution. And obviously, we can all appreciate that Carol is quite brilliant at this, because you're dealing with curators of all different levels, curators like Hollis Goodall, who's an expert in Japanese ceramics, or Janice Katz, an expert in Japanese art, and curators at smaller museums who may know nothing about the field but is passionate. And yet you talk turkey with all of them and you make it happen. And we're all very grateful. Thank you, Carol. To expand further on your previous comments, Hollis, in which you spoke about various categories, what are the considerations for an institution in actually acquiring a Japanese ceramic work? Are these works shared by multiple departments? And are the acquisitions a collaboration between, for example, Japanese art and contemporary art departments, or the decorative art department? Please give me some insight into how you, as a curator, were able to work with your colleagues and how you convinced your institution to acquire works for your department or shared by other departments. Hollis?
I was until recently working at a museum, the ghost of which you see at the upper left there. The new building is being built. It's starting to look solid, which is great. This museum does not have an acquisitions budget, which makes it dependent entirely on donations. With the varied tastes and priorities of our donors, who include Carol and Jeffrey, and Gordon Broadsher, and Susan Peters, Ann Kahn, Martha Drexler Lynn, and Fred and Ann Notahel, for all of whom have presented museum with collections, and Gabrielle Lurie, Raleigh Marcus, and Nick Habatake, who've promised contemporary ceramics to the museum. LACMA can now tell a relatively comprehensive story about Japanese ceramics of the 20th and 21st centuries. This year, Susan Peters' donations are adding significantly to the representation of Japanese women artists at that museum. Another peculiarity of LACMA is that Japanese ceramics have been collected in the Japanese art department, the decorative arts department, and the modern and contemporary art departments. Of modern and contemporary, there are 2 separate departments. We share when it comes to installations, though, of course, conferring first. As there are several Japanese artists who have been trained and live outside of Japan, it has made most sense for their work to reside in the non-Japanese departments. Artists who did not develop their skills or their priorities in a Japanese setting have a much different approach to creating works of art. Such artists would include Toshiko Takaezu, Keiko Fukushima, Jun Kaneko, Minao Mizuno, Hosono Hitomi, and others. Installation art, depending on its scale, would work within the architecture of the Pavilion for Japanese Art at LACMA, or it might be too large, in which case it's much more reasonable for the modern or contemporary art departments to plan the piece into their more voluminous galleries. Keiko Fukushima's work, by the way, has similarities to Mishima Kimiyo's pieces due to their political content, little of which seems to be found elsewhere in Japanese ceramics. Were there a budget or an endowment for acquisition to work with? As far as women artists go, a scientific and historical approach would be to start by having representation of women who have made a name for themselves creating work in the traditional kiln sites, where historically it was very difficult to gain entry for women. Such artists would include Tsuji Kyo, Koyama Kiyoko, or Tokuri Yasukichi IV. among others. Then it makes sense to promote the work of exceptional women artists who are trained in the Japanese art university system, which has been significantly more flexible about welcoming serious students despite their gender. Finally, one could pursue major works of artists who worked abroad but continue their relationship with Japan and its arts, like Ogawa Machiko or Katsumata Chieko. Anne Kahn from San Diego did donate a fantastic piece of Katsumata Chieko's work to LACMA a couple of years ago, and Susan Peters is donating a work by Ogawa Machiko. The world is still waiting for a living national treasure female ceramist, though the system is weighted against women who trained outside of the atelier system to carry on ancient traditions in pottery. The more common and less historically based way that museums collect is through donations, wherein a private collection enters a museum, creating a base from which the curator could, through an acquisition budget, fill gaps that result from lacunae in the donor's interests. With a budget, one could then go hunting for watershed women artists whose work is either exceptional or promotes women's issues or aesthetics. One could bring museums' collections to the present by studying exhibitions and collections both in Japan and in the West, using the knowledge gained to find acquisitions. Many museums that depend on donation for building their collections show heavy representation of the taste of American or European galleries and dealers, rather than being comprehensive. On the other hand, some collectors take their thirst for knowledge on the road to travel and meet artists in Japan, broadening their outlook. There are donors who look for representative works by artists to purchase, though most are looking for something that fits their personal taste and budget. That is where the museum generally differs in approach from the individual. The museum's purpose is to give the public a sense of what varied approaches represent the evolution of Japanese ceramics in each decade, with star pieces around which to develop the story. For the curator, it is important to have resources to help their overall understanding of Japanese ceramics, and particularly the work of women artists. Ideally, it's good for a curator to be able to study such journals as Honoho Geijutsu, which LACMA doesn't have, by the way, in case someone would like to donate their library of those journals. Joan told me about that journal decades ago, but I never found the funds to buy the whole set. The fascinating thing about that journal is that it has a pretty broad view of who's doing what, not dependent on whose work is being exported. A second ideal resource is funding for travel to Japanese localities to keep up with their exhibitions and view their collections. Last week, Joan sent out a Facebook post about her visit to the Ibaraki Ceramic Art Museum that included pottery by artists whose work I'd never seen. The reality is that many museums are entirely dependent on the giving hearts of those philanthropists who support the idea of bringing great art to the public eye. And it is the greatness of those individuals that we thank for the ability to see an abundance of contemporary Japanese ceramics in public institutions.
Thank you, Hollis. And that brings up a point about size. And as you look at these masterworks by Inoue Sensei, that you can get a sense of scale with the gentleman standing in the back. They're massive, and the only people that I know of around today are the Horvitzes willing to make a plunge for a piece that doesn't fit in their house and that they know will never enter their house, and then contribute them to museum collections, like the wife of this particular artist, Nakagawa, and also Akiyama Yo. So if museums can encourage other collectors like Carol and Jeffrey, who are incredibly generous, who are willing to make acquisitions that are not necessarily their scale or their personal taste, but they deem really important and deserve museum viewing, it's important to encourage those collectors, and hopefully tonight we're inspiring some of them. I have a couple questions here. Maybe we have a little bit of time. I'll probably just pick two of them. And maybe my first question is to Carol. You've traveled to Japan many times, often with me. Can you tell us a little bit how actually meeting the artists, and as Hollis said, some of her supporters also go to Japan to meet the artists, how these meetings impacted how you eventually collected their art and that of other artists? And maybe you have some idea of a particular event other than the Fujikasa story, how meeting an artist changed your viewpoint or inspired you to make an acquisition.
Sure. Thank you, Joan. Traveling Japan is an absolute joy. And Joan, thank you for all the opportunities to meet these artists. Meeting the artist itself gives you a better understanding of the art. You really, for me, especially without seeing what they physically have to do to create these objects, I wouldn't really understand it. It gives you another appreciation. Some of these objects are very large and difficult to move around, and put in and out of a kiln that can be dangerous. So it gives me a new appreciation and understanding of the process, which is actually one of the areas I'm weak on. So the quick answer is just the understanding.
Thank you, Carol. I'd like to ask a question for Tashima. So Daniel, if you can stand by to help us here. Tashima Sensei, you're a professor at a major university and have had many, many students through the years. What can you tell us about the current generation, the young people who are now not yet graduated, but working with you, and especially among the women of this current class, if you will? How do you see them building upon the heritage of the women who are in radical clay? And how might culture be different in Japan at this point in time and change their perspective? How are, in other words, how are they going to be different from the last 2 or 3 generations of women artists in Japan? Daniel, if you wouldn't mind.
田島先生、今からの若い世代の女性、陶芸家についてのご意見とか、その若い人が今からどういうふうに新しい、今までと違う作品を作るかについてのご意見をお願いいたします。
陶芸家として表現者になることを決めたのは、大学教育によるものです。現在、大阪芸大、もしくは他の大学でも陶芸を学ぶ女子学生が増えている状況なので、女性が陶芸家として活動を行う人数は多くなっていると思います。ダニエルさん。
It's largely because of my university education that I decided to become a ceramics artist. Today, the number of female students studying ceramics at universities has actually been increasing. So I believe that the number of women who are actively engaged as ceramic artists is also growing.
陶芸家の作品表現は多様ですが、特に素材と手と指先との関わりが深く、密度を感じさせる作風が多く見受けられる気がいたします。
So the work of female ceramic artists today is actually extremely diverse, but I've particularly found that many of the female ceramicists work in a style that has a great depth of interconnection in the relationships between materials and hands and fingers, and that much of their work evokes what I think of as a kind of density.
新進気鋭の女性陶芸家の作品が日本国内のみならず、海外で注目されるチャンスを得て高く評価されることは誠に素晴らしく、この度のラディカルクレイ展で日本の多くの女性陶芸家をアメリカの皆様にご紹介いただけますことに心から感謝しています。
So I think it's really truly wonderful that the works of promising female ceramic artists are gaining attention and receiving high praise, not only within Japan, but also overseas. And I'm sincerely grateful for the opportunity presented by the exhibition Radical Clay to introduce many Japanese female ceramic artists to the people of America.
Thank you.
One quick question to you, Hollis, or Carol, I don't know who has the answer to this. How did you come up with the title Radical Clay for the show?
Actually, it was a meeting between Janice Katz and Joe Earl and I. Each of us came up with 5 titles, and we whittled it down to 3 and presented it to the powers at Chicago, and then they produced their favorite and then ran it by Carol and Jeffrey, I believe.
Wonderful.
So that was that. My favorite bad title was Skirting Tradition. Get it?
Ooh,
Get it? Get it? Get it?
okay. Can I use it? Or let's work on a show, Hollis. Let's make that happen. I love it. But Radical Clay, will surely get more people in the door.
I think so. I think so. People, Joe and Janice both reminded me that not that many women wear skirts these days.
No.
But I had just seen a film noir where one woman was saying about another woman, "Who's the skirts?"
Oh.
I just thought it was. I thought it was kind of perfect,
Wonderful.
but I lost.
Okay, well, Radical Clay it is, and it's in stone. There we go. Okay, guys, everybody who's still there listening and is not passed out because it's too late at night or barely up, Radical Clay is available. You can find it online. The other Horvitz show, Transcendent Clay, which is now at the Brooklyn Museum and traveling to 4 other venues at least, is also available. And the 3rd volume, which we haven't touched on this show, is at the Mint Museum in North Carolina, of a wonderful collection of not just Japanese clay, Western clay, contemporary craft, as they call it, is also available and very informative. So here are 3 publications that just came out with women on 2 of the covers. And of course, Kondo family, there are no women artists, and it's really exciting for the field to be able to promote 3 exhibitions and 3 major publications simultaneously. And just for those of you who might still want to buy some of this stuff, we will be doing a show during Asia Week in 4 months, focusing on blue and or white, if you will, with material made by Kondo Takahiro and many of his contemporaries and some of his predecessors. We currently have a tea-bowl and teaware show up on our website. And for the winter show, pairing with the exhibition in Chicago, we are doing an exhibition with many works that were commissioned for this exhibition, as well as works that I've scouted out over a number of years to highlight the work of 20 of the 36 artists in the Chicago show. So stay tuned, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. As I said, spanning many time zones. Thank you for waking up early or staying up late. Carol, thank you for giving us a good part of your wedding anniversary. Happy anniversary to you and Jeffrey. Daniel, thank you for pitching in tonight. You are invaluable. And to our audience, stay tuned for our next panel. I will say in February, the Asia Week New York will be doing a panel on Kondo Takahiro. And we'll stay tuned to our website. We'll be able to give you more information on that. Probably will be the end of February. And that will be led by Joe Earl, who is the author of 2 of the catalogs in front of you previously on the screen. So thank you all. Good night, good morning, and be safe and Happy New Year. Happy holidays.